There you are. That's the former President of Ireland, Mary Robinson, talking about your brother, Kevin Boyle. Yes. This is Louis Boyle with me this morning. And Louis, I'm not family, but I'm filled with pride hearing her speak that way about your brother, Kevin.
Yeah, and so am I. It's a great honour to listen to somebody of the esteem of Mary Robinson talking with us, giving such a warm tribute to Kevin.
Yeah, warm is an important word in there,
indeed.
because she's very human talking
indeed,
about
Indeed, they had a very good relationship together because they shared the same profession and they worked quite closely together. She was ultimately a lawyer as well as being President of Ireland. So, yes.
It's huge.
Indeed.
And I see the shadows of Castle Street hanging all over the Robinson interview, because that's where the family originated.
Yes, indeed.
You start across the street from McCann's Bakery.
That's correct. That's correct. Well, we were a family of 9 and lived in 37A Castle Street, just opposite McCann's Bakery. And when you stood outside our house and you turned right, 100 yards or so was the Abbey.
Yes.
And you turned left, and then was the Sacred Heart and the Poor Clare's Convent. So naturally, the girls, there were six boys and 3 girls, and the girls went up to the nuns, and we went to the Christian Brothers. Natural. So my father was a taxi man, very well known taxi man in Newry, and
I refer to him as one of the last gentlemen.
Well, you might say
taxi drivers of Newry.
Yes, indeed, one of the reasons.
Be suited, clean shirt,
and
looking
a really
sharp,
big black taxi.
Yeah.
And
I rather think he smoked a pipe.
He smoked a pipe, indeed.
I remember this.
Indeed, it's something we all inherited for a period of time after him, including Kevin. But Kevin also always, I think his leadership ability stood out from the beginning, because he became an altar boy.
Yes.
And very quickly he became a head altar boy.
This was in the cathedral.
In the cathedral, yes, indeed. That's actually in the brochure that we'll talk about in a moment. There's a very nice photograph of Kevin in a very, very saintly, handsome pose as a young altar boy. And I know he was well in with the bishop, and he was very highly regarded.
That would have been O'Doherty at the time.
It would have
Eugene
been. It would have been
O'Doherty.
indeed. So Kevin, he was quite a good student, and he went on then to Queen's University. I should say, just to go back about Castle Street, can I just say one thing about Castle Street? I think it was a terrible tragedy, the way that whole community was ripped apart in the late 60s, and well, we left in 1970. And you know, growing up there as a child, I can remember, and it's the only time I can remember being part of a community.
Yes.
Everybody knew everybody else. The kids.
Mary Street was the same.
Mary Street, Castle Street, North Street, Water Street,
Yep.
all of that there. And the boys, we had our own games and our own gangs and played together, went to school together. And of course, naturally, where we were steeped in religion.
Yeah,
everybody.
of course.
In our family, we had the family rosary, we had the prayers at school, we had Sunday Mass, we had devotions, holy hours, Lent, confessions, everything.
I have
like
to
that,
ask you, and maybe
yes.
the answer to the question is obvious, but I'm asking it anyway.
Yes.
Did this impinge mightily on the making of Louis Boyle and on Kevin?
Well, we're here to talk about Kevin Boyle, but
I mean, did it impinge?
No, I think the example given by my father and mother, who were really devout Catholics and went nearly to the Mass every day and communion. I mean, it's something that impinged very, very deeply on us, and that's always still with me. Now, I think Kevin, I would say, if he was here today, would say he's gone beyond religion. He would have gone beyond religion, and I think his spirituality would have been much greater than any, and that would be the same with myself. But that sense of especially the example of the parents and being brought, it's still something you'd never lose, I think.
Was it perhaps that spirituality, that burgeoning spirituality, that drove him in the direction of concerns for other people?
Well, I think so, because all of us in our family have had that kind of humanity side of us. We wanting to be and we wanting to help, and I think, I mean, Kevin, I mean, we'll come to talk a little bit about him. Kevin was a campaigner for people. He was always passionate about justice, fair play, and he was always, he was a person of great integrity. And I think that came from our parents.
Where did you
my
first?
Father, essentially my father, we lived in an entirely Catholic area. But I don't think in my parents there was a bigoted bone in my parents.
Yes,
We
no, there wouldn't have
never any bigotry, you know, and a great respect for people of other religions. My father, of course, as a taxi man, provided the service for everybody in the town.
When did you first see and become aware of Kevin's growth in spirituality and also in maturity?
Well, Kevin, maybe just take a little through Kevin's life. He went to university, did law.
He went to the Abbey first.
He went to the Abbey, of course, yes. And I think
would he have been a student of McFarland?
No, I think he was before.
He was before Brother McFarland.
Brother Mullen and Brother Newell and Doherty and Paddy Arthur Clunion and people like that.
These are the names of history.
Yeah, and we all did Latin, of course, and Irish. Kevin was a great Irish speaker. He never lost that Irish capacity to speak Irish. But he went to university and got a law degree, got a very good degree, and then shortly after that was appointed as a junior lecturer and then as a senior lecturer in Queen's. And then he did a diploma in criminology in Cambridge. Yeah. And came back, and at that time in the late 60s, as a lecturer, that he became involved in the civil rights movement. And maybe we could come back and talk about that in a moment.
Absolutely.
Because I think that's a big part of
that. Coming to civil rights.
Maybe just it might be better just to trace so people are familiar with what happened, because a lot of people say to me, Kevin went to Galway and we never heard of him since that, you know. But maybe come back.
Before Galway.
Before Galway,
he was at Queen's.
He was at Queen's, and he was he also was called to the bar in Northern Ireland.
Yes.
And was called to the bar in the Republic of Ireland. And
subsequently was called to the bar. To the both.
Subsequently, he was called to the bar in England.
In England.
And I should say that I very often bump into lawyers, barristers and judges who were taught by Kevin. Kevin was a criminal law teacher, lecturer, and they all remembered very well his criminal law. Now, one thing about Kevin, I said about his integrity and his commitment to people. Kevin could have joined the gravy train and become a very prominent criminal lawyer, making megabucks. But he wasn't interested in that. Kevin's big passion was human rights. So in 1978, as I said, I'll come back to the civil rights because there were problems there with the university and himself in terms of the civil rights. He got an appointment as the youngest ever professor of law in Galway. In fact, we're setting up a new faculty, and Mary Robinson talked about the human rights. Kevin set up a human rights centre in Galway. So Kevin was he was there for about 7 or 8 years, and he was very fondly remembered. And then in the mid-80s, he got this appointment, which was associated with the University of Essex as the chair of law at the University of Essex, based in Colchester, and the appointment of an organisation called Article 19, which is an article in the United Nations Convention about freedom of information. So Kevin worked for a number of years. Some American philanthropist provided a lot of money to set this organisation up, and it had a worldwide thing. So
talk to me about that bridge from the academia of Queen's University to the man who became a consultant in human rights, very interested in human rights, getting positions in relation to human rights. But he's a relatively young man. Queen's University has just finished his studies, become a professor. At what point did the maturation into that area begin to occur?
Well, maybe talk about, I think Kevin's always, I think, saw that human rights and law had a very close connection.
Yes.
And he wanted lawyers to be interested in rights and you know.
And was this before what we had in Newry and in Northern Ireland?
Well, maybe just let's talk. Maybe we should just talk about the civil rights and
Please do,
because that was a big part of his involvement in Newry. Kevin, as a lecturer at that time, in the aftermath of October the 5th in Derry, in Duke Street.
Yes.
When the police battened the civil rights martyrs. You remember William Craig was the Minister of Home Affairs, and that was captured on RTE cameras, and that sparked the civil rights movement, I think, in many ways.
That was the moment the RUC man hit the...
That's right, that's right. That's very, very...
A Derry man was hit in the stomach, an amazing picture.
That is correct.
And John Hume was standing in the row as well, I believe, maybe.
He was,
Yeah.
and Jerry Fitt.
Yep.
Now, back at university, it was the start of the academic term, and there was a lot of anger on the part of the students. So that was the start of what was called the People's Democracy.
Yes.
And Kevin was involved in that with Bernadette Devlin, with Michael Farrell, Rory McShane,
Yes.
another Newry man, and quite a few others, Eamon McCann from Derry.
Yes.
And that's there was then a series of civil rights marches. So the first civil rights march, which Bernadette Devlin put her hand up and signed the form for, was going down to the City Hall, and it got as far as University Street and was blocked by a huge cordon of I remember witnessing that, because Paisley got Sandy Rowe out and they had a counter demonstration in Shaftesbury Square. So obviously the fallout of that was they said they would let the students down the next week.
Yes.
So there was another march the following Wednesday down to, and it was stopped at Lennon Hall Street because Paisley had taken over the centre of Belfast outside the City Hall, and there was a sit down by the students. And there's a wonderful photograph of Kevin, which I can actually send you, and it's in the Ulster Museum, of a big cordon of RUC, the RUC men in their hats, and Kevin with a loudspeaker, and the students sitting down. Now, I should say that Kevin's interest in civil rights and so was always, he abhorred violence, and he always saw the dangers of violence lurking in the wings. So
hold that thought, if you would. He abhorred violence and always saw the dangers of violence, because we need to take a break now and then back in 2 minutes.
Okay.
Destination Newry. We're back in moments.
OSM Engineering, Chancellor's Road, Newry. Specialising in PLC programs, electrical control systems and supplies, electrical, pneumatic, hydraulic and mechanical maintenance. Vast range of electrical components in our new shop, and a wealth of combined experience of over 50 years. Contact us today, OSM Engineering, 11 Chancellors Road, Newry, 308 38778 or 308 38782 or osm-irl.com.
Down to Max for fresh food at great prices. We deliver free to local businesses and schools, and we also deliver to the local area for a small charge of £3. So come down to us now.
The amazing world of fine furniture. McCabe's on the Belfast Road. An Aladdin's cave of hidden treasure. Quality above all. 5 generations trading. McCabe's have it right. A pride in tradition. The creation of value. Value and quality in our beds. Value and quality throughout the home. Value and quality in the finest sofas and chairs. Dining tables, chairs, memorable feasts. Pianos, a symphony of quality and value in a shop that grows in size with every step you take. McCabe's, the Belfast Road, Newry.
Newry Fuel Centre, with home heating oil deliveries available and best price for motor and home heating oil. Contact Newry Fuel Centre. A fast fill pump on site on white diesel, less than £1.28 a litre. Special offers on premium coal, 25 kilogram, only £6.80. Premium doubles, 25 kilogram, £6.50. Singles heavy slack, £5. Propane and butane tanks, only £23. Open Monday to Saturday, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Sunday, 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. Newry Fuel Centre, Carney Hall Industrial Complex, Newry, 302-51393. Attended service and cash and carry. Newry Fuel Centre.
You've reached your destination.
Destination Newry. I'm joined by Louis Boyle, Newry man. brother of the great humanitarian, the great human rights activist, Professor Kevin Boyle, Newry man as well, of course. Provenance in Castle Street in Newry, grew strong in his legal profession. I suppose in some ways, the zenith of his career was when he was advisor to former President Mary Robinson when she had responsibilities at the United Nations for human rights affairs. And we've taken the career from Castle Street School at the Abbey into Queen's. And Kevin, now dead, as we say, tragically and sadly so early at 67, he got involved himself and was a leader within the Northern Ireland civil rights movement. Now, many people would deride the civil rights movement and say, look, it was a precursor for the violence to come. But Kevin Boyle detested violence, had no part to play in it, and the civil rights that he loved, that he spawned in a sense, was not violent.
Indeed, and I think that he was a founder member of the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Movement Executive, and he also, as I said, got involved in the People's Democracy. Now, Mary Robinson mentioned that long march, the 4-day march, which from Belfast to Derry, and Kevin was opposed to the march taking place because he saw the potential of the reaction, the violent reaction from Protestant and Loyalist people because of the area they were passing through.
Yes.
But once the decision was taken democratically to go ahead with the march, and Kevin then felt he had to go and support his, in fact, some of his students were there. So subsequent to that march, there was the first Newry Civil Rights March in January 1969. And Kevin was down. He spent a large part of the week down here because they were planning it and trying to ensure. His role was always to try and keep it peaceful. Because he saw, and so there are images of him again with the loud hailer speaking, trying to keep the crowd under control. And as you know, sadly, that particular day, the reroute of the march was a nonsense in the town of Newry.
It went down Monaghan Street, it reached the Savoy corner.
And was to turn left.
And was to turn left and continue down there.
There was a cordon of police Land Rovers.
Which ended up in the canal.
That's right.
I remember.
So the following, the Burnt Tollet event, which Mary Robinson referred to, had a big impact on Kevin because it really was. He saw the B specials and the loyalists battering the students, and the police stood by. I think that they stood by anyway. That's the. So
we shall draw a veil of charity
over that.
Absolutely.
But that certainly didn't impact it on Kevin. And then we all remember Bloody Sunday.
Oh, yes.
And I remember that, and I was sharing a house with him in Belfast at the time.
Hold your thought about Bloody Sunday for a moment, because I wanted to ask you, that was the first moment at the Savoy corner when civil rights turned from peace to violence, because the violence was pushing the thing in.
Yeah.
Did he ever confide in you or talk to you about, one, his disappointment that it had erupted in that way on the day, and where the genesis of that anger came from the civil rights point of view?
Yeah, well, I think if you let's talk about the second civil rights march, because that would illustrate that. That came after, as we know, things started to overtake the civil rights. The civil rights movement became more and more sidelined as more and more violence and more incidents happened, and then the army came in, and of course all of that, and then eventually the IRA arose out of all of that. I mean, I do not believe that they were involved in the civil rights movement at that time, but subsequently. But I mean, Bloody Sunday was a horrific event, and I know it had a hugely deep impact on him. But the result of it was the big march in Newry.
That's right.
From the Meadow.
Formed at the Meadow.
And the whole concern was to prevent it from turning into violence. And the paratroopers had a ring of steel around Newry. And the week before the march, and people came from all over Ireland, but it was a huge march, but it was peaceful. And they only got as far, I think, as Monaghan Street, because I mean there had been a ban on all kinds of marches. Anyway, that was his role. But just to move on, Kevin then after that he got involved in taking cases to the European Court of Human Rights, again, which Mary Robinson referred to. And that was his passion. He did a lot of that for practically free gratis. He wasn't in money. he said he never joined the gravy train of lawyers, which he could easily have done.
Indeed.
So that, and he wrote many publications, and
Wasn't
he and Professor Tom Haddon.
Oh yes, Tom. Yes.
They wrote a number of books, and you remember the New Ireland
Yes, I
Forum
do,
and
of
all of
course,
those kind of events.
Did Kevin suffer as a consequence within his profession from what he had stood for, from what he had done? People deliberately or otherwise misrepresenting his involvement in civil rights.
Just to say about Queen's, I know there was some tension at Queen's from colleagues and from Queen's, the establishment in Queen's. The Vice Chancellor, they would have been pretty pro-unionist, conservative, and I don't, they didn't take too well. So I think, as much as it went at Queen's anyway. So I don't think he suffered. No, I don't think he suffered.
He was always, you see, I think, seen as there was a wisdom there that was associated. He wore the cloak of wisdom.
He came back to Northern Ireland many times to speak. He spoke at the SDLP conferences on a number of occasions. He spoke at international seminars. He travelled. He was a world traveller because he was so knowledgeable and about looking after minorities and minority rights and so forth. But so anyway, that's a course of his events. So he spent the last 20 years more or less in Essex, but he still loved coming over to Northern Ireland. His heart was always in Newry and County Down. I know that.
Was it Colchester he was in?
Colchester he was in. Yeah,
that's where his ashes are. Colchester, no.
Well, maybe just
that's
good, isn't that? He's buried in Colchester.
Oh yeah, okay.
But tragically, Kevin, then we had a reunion of all of our family in 2010 for my sister Anne, her 70th birthday.
Yes.
And it was down in the Bennetts. We had a meeting in Bennetts and Warren Point with all the cousins and nephews, and it was a very nice event. And Kevin was over at that, and I noticed at that time that he just wasn't looking well.
Really.
And then from then to the rest of 2010, he had got cancer, and he was being treated for that, and he went down the hill sadly, and he died on Christmas Day, 2010. I remember getting the phone call from his wife, Joan. It was a very tragic event. And you know the tragedy about Kevin, and sometimes you wonder, is that he was a person who had so much to give, and so much, he just wanted to live, and to write, and to contribute, and what things he would have got involved in. He was ready to retire, although I don't believe he would have retired. And just to give you an example of this, because in the aftermath of his death,
did some beautiful letters.
Just absolutely beautiful. Just to say, the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust, which he was a member of, said, will be forever grateful for the role that Kevin played in setting the framework of the democratic audit of the UK. And he said he played a key role in establishing the audit and disseminating its philosophy.
Yeah. That's the Rowntree Trust.
That's the Rowntree Trust. And here's from the then Commissioner of the United Nations High Commission of Human Rights.
My goodness.
Professor Kevin Boyle was a towering figure in the human rights community. Practicing human rights law in the national region courts, he sought redress for very real and serious human rights violations, where he taught with great enthusiasm and skill. Professor Boyle's time at this, he talked about 2001, as a senior advisor and speechwriter to the then High Commissioner Mary Robinson is remembered here with great fondness and admiration. Engaging, dedicated, extremely intelligent, hard-working, intellectually curious, open-minded, warm-hearted are some of the many adjectives that come to mind.
And this is the man of Castle Street.
This is the man of Castle Street.
My goodness.
In the aftermath of his death, there was some lovely obituaries written in the regional Irish Times and the London Times and papers like that. Then there was so many lovely letters which Joan, his wife, received. And then in June 2011, they had a tripartite teleconference between Queen's, Essex and Galway. A conference, one more morning conference, just to talk about Kevin's work. See, Kevin, a lot of people said to me, we didn't get to his funeral, but are you going to have a memorial service?
Yes, of course.
And I know that Kevin and his wife did not want the traditional kind of a service where the great and the good would have come and said, he wanted to focus on his work and his beliefs and his ideals, so what he was passionate about. So then they had a they planted, there was a tree planting ceremony at Queen's University, the corner of Chlorine Gardens and Strandmillis Road. An Irish white beam tree is planted there with a plaque for Kevin.
Do you?
And then Galway presented him with an honorary degree in September 2011, which Joan and his two sons and myself attended. And you know, the very sad thing about that, Kevin would have been extremely proud to, but sadly the knowledge of the degree came just a few days after his death, and that was very, very, very sad. And then there was this big international conference at Essex, and then finally what we're talking about here is Kevin's archives.
Is it? Yes, all his papers there.
Kevin, his wife Joan discovered a huge number of boxes of papers and correspondence and books and writings in his office in his home, plus in his at the university. So she donated all of these to the University of Galway, and they were delighted to receive
Absolutely.
it. And
tell me this, do you... He's gone from you physically.
Yeah.
Is he still around you? Do you still sense his presence within you? Do you still remember him as a boy, him growing up, the altar boy going down to the cathedral? Do you sense the hand of his wisdom in some strange way transcends the death thing and lays it on your shoulder?
Well, one answer is I don't know. I don't know what's happening afterwards or what's coming. But I do feel, I mean, first of all, I feel very, very proud to have a brother of such eminence who had such integrity and such passion for justice and and I think part of that rubs off on me. I must say that I would be very much of the same ilk now. I cannot stand injustice. I cannot stand corruption and I would be passionate about trying to support people who are in difficulty. And I think it's all rubbed off. And so I think that, but at least through his archives and through all of these events that have been held in his memory, that helps his memory to live on. Not very many people. Well, there's actually two trees planted in his memory, and so these events. And this archives will be a permanent recollection of all of his writings and
the influence continues,
and will continue for many years, because it'll be for scholars and for students and postgraduate students and so forth.
They'll be drawing on this.
Absolutely, they're going down. Yeah, so that's why they had a very special event, by the way, as 3 or 4 weeks ago, which I had to go down to. I went down with Joan to set up this archives, and Michael Farrell was there, and Bernadette Devlin was there.
How was Bernadette?
Bernadette spoke as passionately as she ever speaks, and she's in her 70s
now. She must be in her 70s.
Oh, she would be, yeah. She was the same vintage as us. No, actually, she's the same vintage, same age as myself.
Yeah.
67.
You're 67. I'm older than you.
67. Bernadette, but you know, she spoke at that conference without a note.
My goodness.
Just got up and spoke. Now she's still, there's an underlying, I don't say bitterness, there's something, you know, but she really, but people were enthralled by her. But she spoke very warmly of Kevin, and so did Michael Farrell, and so did quite a few of the other speakers.
Was he ever, to your knowledge, tempted by politics, to go into politics?
No. I think Kevin would have recognised that politics is corrupting.
Yeah,
you know, if you want to maintain your integrity and your neutrality and your honesty, I'm not to say that all politicians are not like that, but I think there's a lot. I think that.
But also, he needed. I rather think he needed to preserve the independence of caring for all.
That's exactly it.
That's exactly.
Just a little anecdote. He worked with Professor Tom Haddon.
Oh, yes.
Tom was a Protestant Catholic. Kevin was a Catholic. Background. I mean, I'm not talking about practicing, but background and perceived to be such in Northern Ireland, and they did a lot of work together and had a fair bit of influence. But they wrote a book called Northern Ireland: A Positive Proposal.
Yes.
Which you know, looked at a lot of the issues that were dealt with at the New Ireland Forum. And apparently the story is that when Margaret Thatcher and Gareth Fitzgerald had one of their meetings, Margaret Thatcher brought that book and put it on the table and says, "I'll negotiate on that," he says to Gareth Fitzgerald.
That's beautiful.
And then the Anglo-Irish agreement came, Kevin, I think they had some influence on that Anglo-Irish agreement that came afterwards, which of course caused such horror to the Unionists.
But yet it came.
Yeah,
Get it,
yeah,
Kevin.
yeah. And I just think it's a tragedy that Kevin died so young.
Yeah.
And he had so much more to do. Although I don't think he would ever have retired. He was just on the point of retiring,
Yes,
but I don't think he would ever have retired.
Sadness personified. He is gone from us, but the memory is strong. And with us
Yes,
still.
and as I say, he always had a soft spot for Newry and County Down.
And Yuri has a soft spot for him.
Yeah.
God
Okay.
bless
Well,
you, and thank you for coming.
Okay.
Thank you, Louis Boyle.